Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Dr. Lake Show. This is Dr. Paola Lake, and I'm happy to be here today after a brief period of a break, which is much needed for our own well-being here. And so I'm always happy to be back and to be recording this particular day with Dr. Arthur Burrows. Dr. Arthur Burrows is a registered psychologist who has worked with both adults and done a lot of work with children, previously working in the educational system, right now working in clinical practice with children and adults. And today, what I think is particularly relevant today, especially with what's happening in the world, lots of upheaval and issues about race and bullying. And I think this is a really important topic. And that's what I'm here and invited Dr. Burrows to discuss is some of his experiences working with children who've been bullying, adults who've been bullied, looking at the impact of bullying and ultimately, what can we do to reduce this, what I see as having a really negative impact on us overall? So happy to be here and so happy to have you, Dr. Burrows. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Lake. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, that's great. And this is the second time. So,
Yes, it is.
hopefully we're going to get really comfy with this whole process right? As we the more we do it. Um, I know that you've done a lot of work, and I've worked with the adult level of impact, and maybe a little bit with teens, and you've done definitely a lot more work with bullying. So you have, I'm imagining, an understanding of some of the issues that showed up. You must have seen them in both the educational system, and then now you're working with children and families. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just your experience and exposure and what you've witnessed in that regard.
Sure. Well, like all our listeners, probably growing up, I've witnessed it myself, and either occurring to others or even at some points in my life, in my own experience as an individual. In working with kids, particularly in the education system, I've certainly have worked with both victims and the bullies themselves, as well as worked quite a bit with schools in trying to develop systems to lessen to decrease the amount of sort of bullying behaviors within them. um, I've seen the impact on the victims themselves, which can range the whole impacting the victims' academic performance, their social capacity, their own self-esteem. With adults, I still is on a regular basis in working with adults who presenting with various difficulties that will as part of their life story, there'll be bullying incidents that they still recall quite vividly, and so
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
So it's a little bit embedded everywhere in people's lives, right? This isn't something that we just rarely experience. It's something we will most likely have some encounter with it. I remember even myself as a child, and there was one target. It was a boy in a classroom that everyone wanted to exclude, and they went on a mission to tell all the students to not talk to this individual, to completely ignore him. And I didn't, and I was so, I'm now looking back, I'm thinking that's so nice. I remember being curious, going, why? Like, he was a little bit unusual, maybe a little bit more introverted. So I think one thing that would be nice is, I'm sure everyone has an intuitive understanding of what bullying is because we do talk about it. But how do we look at bullying? What qualifies as bullying that in your encounters?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think for anything we do in trying to intervene, decrease bullying generally, whether it's in the schools to children or to adults in workplaces and situations. It's kind of important to be able to kind of differentiate between what bullying is and maybe just inappropriate behavior or thoughtless behavior and so on. So typically, most of the research kind of identifies three components that need to be present, and the first one is actually intention of harm. Now, intention of harm is kind of hard to always get the bully to admit, probably more than anything else, because of course, oh, I didn't mean it, and so on. But ultimately, there's this underlying purposefulness to it. Probably the most important component as far as effectiveness of bullying is there needs to be an imbalance of power. Now that power, I think often, at least when I grew up, bullying was, you're walking home and the kid pushes you in the snowbank and beats you up. That growing up in Winnipeg, that's kind of what we did,
Wow.
or the bullies did anyway.
Yes.
And so that's a good example of somebody would require some sort of physical power over the victim. But there's other kinds of powers too. Of course, there's social power. So just having more social influence than the victim, and this is where victims often are socially isolated or don't have as much social influence in their group of peers or even with the adults in their lives. Those tend to be the two most obvious ones. But the imbalance can also be, some children are quicker, have a better capacity for verbal language than other kids. So that is another place where there can be an imbalance. Academic performance, sort of anything that empowers somebody more than another person. Social can also run in racial differences or differences in socioeconomic groups. It can,
Lots of variation.
how well somebody dresses, compared to others.
Yeah. Anything
Um,
that sort of for the victims is something that makes them stand out as different in some ways. Um, you know, uh, Glasses or unusual trait, something that doesn't quite blend in.
yeah.
I always think of that movie Mean Girls. I don't know if you ever saw that one, right? But it was this real separation between the popular and the unpopular, and
Mhm.
how that can kind of feed into some of the bullying elements that happen, right? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So it's sort of anything that gives one person the power over the other, and it's the intended use of that power, and the third component. So we've got intention, we have an imbalance of power, but also it needs to be repeated. It needs to be a pattern. It can't be a one-off, and this is and understanding that and teaching children and adults, those three components and operationalizing those are quite important for as a starting point, just to understand what bullying is and what it's not. If Susie doesn't talk to you, one day at lunch, that's not necessarily bullying. It may be thoughtlessness,
Right.
or maybe Susie making a choice that day, which is totally valid. But if Susie does that with the intention of harming, Betty,
Yeah.
there is an imbalance of power, and it gets repeated over and over again. Then we're looking at bullying.
Yeah. It's like the child that horrified to go to school, and I've certainly heard lots of stories of their experiences. Is not that it's a one-time event that they're trying to recover from. It's that it actually creates a climate of unsafety for them as they
Mm.
approach school. I mean, I feel for that experience and being kind of trapped in it. Do they always? This is one thing I've found interesting is just when do children actually report that they're being bullied? Like, is there a feeling around it that makes them not want to share it with their parents? What factors go into that?
Well, certainly when it comes to bullying, there is a common component is that the victim gets isolated away from possible sources of support. And boys typically are less likely to report bullying than girls, but I think generally it is quite underreported. Some of the I was just checking some recent research statistics out of Canada, and typically, what was I looking for? About I think 38% of males, 30% of adult females report occasional bullying during their school years. So we know it's happening to approximately at least 30% or 1/3 of kids at some point in their school. But that's in retrospect. In any given year, I'm just trying to find my stats here, which I can't find.
Oh, I know. Typical.
But yeah, right.
It walks away.
Yeah. Well, interesting enough, I was going to say 40% of Canadian workers report weekly bullying, which was just to kind of point out that this does actually occur to adults just as frequently, perhaps even
So
more.
the question I have is the bullies of, so this is something that can happen through a lifetime, and I absolutely see that. And I always wonder about the qualities of the bullies, um, the ones who are adults, and the bullies in that are bullies in that behave that way in adulthood. Have they done research on correlation between they were bullies in childhood? Like, have they done any of that kind of work? I don't know, but
There's a bit out there. Typically, sort of risk factor to become a bully is typically sort of children with persistent sort of negative attitude about things, early aggression. Typically, the group you want to worry about, if by grade 3 or so, a child is identified as sort of a chronic bullier, that is likely to, and I don't know what exactly the rate is, and I'm not sure if there is research on that, but if by the age of 3, the teachers say, yeah, that child is a chronic bullier, you have that child actually has a number of risk factors moving forward. Bullies tend to achieve their most influence and power by around grade 8. And then, interestingly enough, their power starts to diminish. So the bullies can often be the really popular kids up to about grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, and then it starts to drop off, fortunately. Now, how many go on to become bullies in adulthood? I'm just trying to remember. There's not a lot of research on that I'm aware of, but
I think that would be interesting research, however, because I the first thing I think we villainize the bullies, and I understand that we want to sanction it and we want to, it's a behavior we want to stop, but I don't know if there's a differences between, let's say, the sociopathic bully that eventually becomes kind of a, versus the ones who have, there's a foundation behind their bullying. And so I think it might be helpful for people to understand, like, what is it with bullies?
yeah.
What's their intrapsychic? What's going on inside them that gets them to behave this way, really?
Mhm. Well, there's probably the risk factors for them, and girls and boys separate somewhat in this group. The boys tend to sort of be coming out of families where there often is a power imbalance that's demonstrated by the adults as well. So
Right.
and not that I want to pick solely on the dads, but
Yeah.
a prominent male figure who uses power as a means of getting what they want, sort of constantly. So it's very strongly modeled. With girls, there's that as well, but there's also quite often it the girls are suffering at home through some sort of abuse and so on. So similar, but But
So is so the mechanism itself might be, at home, they feel powerless and they have this role modeling that they internalize, and then they
yeah,
bring that into their school environment, and somehow it helps them. It's a coping mechanism for them in the midst of some troubles at home that's happening.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's a whole range of other whether so I guess the important part with bullies to remember, it doesn't necessarily mean there's psychopathology at the core level. It doesn't, we often think about the sociopaths who have no empathy at all for anybody, and in its truest form, we suspect that neurological capacity to have empathy is not there.
Right.
Now, but those people are actually very, very rare,
They're small.
fortunately.
Yeah.
But there are people who develop a lack of capacity to feel empathy and so on because it's never been shown to them, or learned that, have modeled for them that the best way to get what you want is
Yeah.
by domineering other people, and find the weak and take advantage of them. So
And that's why those are such formative years, because what we learn about our reward system stems from our childhood, those behavioral ones. And if they learned that the only way to get what you want at a young age is through pushing and bullying, there's some sort of feedback. And ultimately, that's what we're wanting to break for those kids. I remember one story. This was a public TV program, and it was a boy who had been bullying, and so I find the thing I find interesting about this is the element of empathy, because I know our frontal lobes, and empathy forms in the frontal lobe, and that's when we start to be able to do perspective taking and for somebody else. And I don't think all children have that. They're still so young and with lack of experience, and then of course
mhm,
they just follow role models. But this particular individual, he was a bully, and one of his reasons for being bullying is because he wanted to be part of this group. And it helped him feel that if he joined in the bullying, that he was going to be accepted and respected and admired.
mhm,
But what turned it around for him was actually reading a book about a boy who had been bullied. And it was a story about what he went through, the damage it caused in his life. And it completely turned this boy around.
mhm,
After reading this book, he said, I didn't realize, especially because we minimize words, and this is, in his mind, they're just words. I'm not physically hurting or attacking this person. That's how he kind of justified it until he read this. And so it's nice to know that there's an element there that they can be transformed at
yeah.
that younger age, right? When they're engaged in bullying.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly, and I think that is a really important point that you're making. Well, two components is that helping them develop empathy and understanding of how their actions are impacting others, but the other component is sort of understanding what the bully is trying to achieve, and as with any behavior. Typically, if you really want to simplify, everything we do is to either get something or avoid something, and
Yeah.
and uh, and and if you want to change a behavior, you first need to understand the function of that behavior. So understanding, and it quite often is that social power or 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 um, or influence, because we are social beings, and to be quite honest, if that's what the bully is trying to achieve, there's a positive spin to that, because at least they want to be socially involved. They want social, to be there, to be part of a social group. And really, what to change bullying is, in that group in particular, is to figure out, or to teach them other ways of gaining influence within their social group, and so on.
I
So
remember seeing some parents, and certainly that uh, maybe themselves had negative attitudes about people that are different.
Mhm.
themselves that are, you know, judgmental, and that those become some of the attitudes also that the children end up taking on, right? Is
Yes.
mirroring with their parents' own judgments. And I think in one way that's how we perpetuate racism. And, you know, we basically fear that which we don't understand. And so we judge it and put it aside. And those are other elements that can feed into this
Mhm.
issue around bullying. It is a fairly prominent issue, I think, in our
Oh,
society. Would you not say? Yeah.
yes, for sure. You know, and in my naivety, moving out of the schools, becoming more involved in adult populations, I somewhat thought, okay, I'm going to put all my bullying background to
Throw it away.
aside. I won't need this. Put it in a box, you know,
Right.
and pack it away. And even in organizations I've been involved with from more administrative component, but certainly working in various places, I came across adult bullying, and like I said, yeah, to look back at it now, it's pretty naive. Of course, it goes on, and uh,
Absolutely.
and it tends to be more subtle. Where grade two, I kind of appreciate grade two because you have an easier time spotting it because
Yes. Yeah.
the kids aren't good at hiding it yet.
Yeah.
Although I had one student once who was very good at. I knew he was bullying because every time I turned his back, a kid would start crying close by. But I never. He was just intuitively
Wow.
capacity
Hard
never to
enough
get
to know to hide
caught.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
he was even at his age, and but anyway, in the adult population, it does tend to be it's less direct, and it tends to be of a more social isolation component, and a belittling based on sort of perceived power within the organization. Again, not always the boss. It's quite often peer upon peer, dealing with that can be very problematic, and difficult because adults are so much better at sort of rationalizing it. Oh well, I didn't mean it, and
Yes. It's maybe a little, they're more sophisticated in being able to sort of hide it or disguise it.
yeah,
I certainly have heard of situations where people are, um, even gossip can be really harm. I mean, if you look at what happens to children, and right now the accessibility is a little higher because of the online presence that we have.
yes,
I certainly have seen adult women being bullied even online and in cyberbullying,
oh yes, yeah,
and horribly bullied, in addition to possibly their children. Um,
mhm,
so, I know this has a huge impact on people, and
yeah.
one that is, kind of leaves an imprint in people's lives if they've been exposed to any kind of bullying for any
Oh,
prolonged
oh,
amount of
for
time.
sure. And you raise a good point, around cyberbullying, because this is a relatively, well, at least in my mind, new. It's not all that new anymore. But when I first started really kind of doing looking into bullying and what we could do within school systems regarding it, cyberbullying didn't really wasn't a major component. We didn't have the social media and texting. Most kids didn't have access to that technology, and so we were dealing with old-fashioned bullying. Whether it be as sort of the physical bullying, verbal bullying, name calling, things like that, or that social isolation, gossiping and so on. At least it was all kind of in the here and now
Yeah.
in the building. But with cyberbullying, it's some interesting research out of that, and I'm afraid I don't have the exact numbers, but we know that um, bullies represent a relatively small population in a school environment and in the adult environment as well. Um, but cyberbullying, people who are typically would not be a in-person bully are more likely to bully using media, electronic media. So we actually have a substantial larger group of bullies in that medium, and it's got a number of components that are really quite destructive to it because First of all, and I might also add, there are more witnesses to it as well. And one actual number I can give you is like 35% of kids report having seen bullying online.
Yeah.
You know, and I think what is it? 8% of kids who are online report that they have been bullied. And again, remembering that bullying is intentional, it's repeated, and there's an imbalance of power. So it happens more. I think one of the factors in that is that when you're bullying somebody online, you don't get the feedback of what
Yeah.
that impact is. So it
No,
further removes that one's capacity to feel empathy.
absolutely.
So the other thing is the victims don't always know who it is
Right.
who's
Yeah.
so they don't always know who the instigator is. Sometimes they do because it's like mean text, so it's
Right.
obvious
Right.
who it's coming
Yeah.
from. But they also don't know the audience is bigger.
Yeah.
You know, it's for those people my age, you know, the fight in the playground, you know, you knew who was there, you knew who
Absolutely.
saw it.
Yes.
But online, you have no idea. And it could be the entire school knows about it, or even and certainly I've come across situations where we've had kids who you know, quite often with cyberbullying, so it can be direct mean text to one, but it can also be the spreading of rumors, the posting of videos or pictures online.
Yes.
And you know, I've had situations where we've had victims pictures or videos that have been shared across a whole school district as
Wow.
opposed to or you know, whole region. So cyberbullying is a whole other animal, and it's more frequent than classic bullying, and there's just components that can make it more vicious on the perpetrator
Call
and
it cyber courage.
and what's that? So
Cyber courage.
yeah.
Right? It's like, the anonymity can somehow give an open platform
Oh
for people to feel that they can do anything without any kind of accountability. And I think that's the issue that we're running into when it comes to that.
yeah.
What are I know how damaging this be. What have you witnessed in the work that you've done about how it impacts people and whether it's children or adults
Yeah.
in your experience?
Well, on the school side, you know, we'll have children who start to socially pull away, start avoiding. This is school avoidance, straight out school avoidance, decline in capacity to learn. So they suddenly become less engaged, more distracted, or flat out avoiding school, not interacting socially. They can often tend to pull away as well from the adults, the very persons who could be a source of resource and support for them. You know, we know the research says that, you know, there's a higher risk of depression for the victims. They tend to have more suicidal ideations moving forward, as well as behaviors.
Yeah.
In adults, you know, as I said before, you know, it is quite common for adults who have a history of being bullied. So the bullying stopped after junior high school, but they still do remember it quite vividly. And when those stories come out, you know, they can still feel what the shame and the, you know, the lack of the feeling of lack of power, you know, again, for the victim. What gets stolen from you is that feeling of being able to advocate for yourself and control your world, which we all, that's what helps us get out the door every day, is feeling that somehow I'm going to be able to do things and manage my day. So I move forward in my life and so on. So
I've seen some of the adults that I've worked with when they've experienced some childhood bullying, it's profoundly impacted in depending on their family support system. So,
Mhm.
when we're bullied, it's enough that we're bullied. But if you don't have a supportive family support system in that context, you don't have the avenue to build the resilience to cope with that.
Mhm.
And some of them have been so negatively impacted. And I remember one person in particular, his besides the fact that his self-esteem and sense of confidence in his worthiness and belonging had been impacted,
Mhm.
that it affected him to in every social engagement, to the
Mhm.
point that even the way people looked at him, he projected often that they were judging him, that they
Yeah.
were hating him. So if the look was anything short of a smile, even a glance or a look, just a look of curiosity, in his mind, it erupted in a lot of negative feelings. So his
Mhm.
day-to-day functioning was really negatively impacted by that, right?
Sure, yeah, and
Very
it quite
experience.
often the adults I work with will talk, particularly ones who really are quite avoidant of social interactions for fear of being judged, which is sort of a central component to what we call social anxiety, which is actually quite common. But they'll have a story of being sort of a targeted victim growing up. Now, this doesn't mean everybody with social anxiety experienced this, but when you think about it, if you're a child being bullied, you're going to develop some very strong awareness and expectations that social exchanges are going to go negative
Yeah.
on you. And you're quite right. You come into work and you say hi, George, and George is walking by you in the hallway and he's muttering and got his head down. um, a lot of us would say, oh, I wonder what's bothering George today. But
George is having a bad
somebody,
day.
yeah, right. But if you have a very low self-esteem about yourself and about how you are perceived by others, you're much more likely to assume that George must hate you or be mad at you and so on. So
You mentioned a term which it sounds like you may have heard it from elsewhere, but provocative victim. And I'm curious about that term and if you can talk about it.
sure. So we think of bullies, of being powerful, either socially or physically, and quite often have a very strong demand of the language and able to roll out insults quite easily and so on. And the victims, usually socially isolated, quiet, and not having that similar power. So provocative victims are an interesting group, and working in the schools, they're children who are sort of the way I describe it, is the kind of they're bully wannabes, but they can't quite pull it off totally.
Okay.
And the impact is, so these are sort of the kids where staff will say, well, he kind of had it coming to him. They want to be part of this power group in school, so they hang around with them. um, and of course the bullies will just set these kids up and get them to be the fall guy, and quite often bully them quite a bit themselves.
Oh, wow.
So that's the victim part of these provocative victims. But they have just a negative sort of social orientation. So they're trying to be with the bullies all the time. So they're always right there. Um, and adults will perceive them as being kind of getting what they deserve.
Right. Right.
They're not very they can be quite unpleasant. They often will try to stand up to the adults, so they're often sort of that oppositional kid
Right.
in class, but they can't quite pull it off. So they end up not belonging to the bully group, and they end up not being because the other kids, the non-bullies, don't want to have anything to do with them. So they become quite isolated themselves. But the nasty part is everybody kind of, especially the adults, go, well, they kind of deserve it. So
Right.
they're not necessarily the most pleasant kids, and they're that's one of the groups I mean, I worry about all three, to be quite honest. But because whether you're a victim or a bully,
Want to be
your
around.
prognosis is
Absolutely.
is
Absolutely.
trouble. but this group really is a difficult ones because kind of nobody wants. It's really hard to sell
It's
the
an
let's
interesting one.
help them.
Here, this is when you mentioned that topic, or the concept of provocative victim, I think of, and I've certainly met these individuals where they may act out, they may do something that is on that edge of bullying, but then the response that they get, they feel like a victim to the response to the bullying.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
but they don't link their behavior to how they're being treated. It's as if
yes.
they'll enact the violation, if we want to call it that. And then when there's a negative response to that, that's all they see. All they see is that someone's responded negatively to that, but they can't make that link. All they see is that they've been treated a particular way.
That's exactly, and
That
you know, I've worked with these kids, and even you know, they can be a challenge even for somebody with training in this because
yeah.
there is that lack of connection in their mind of how their behavior is causing their misery and so on. Interestingly enough, when it one of what I would say is a real success story with this group. I was working with this one individual many years ago, and the staff really did not like this particular student, and they were difficult to like. But I was able to convince a very skeptical administrator to try to find ways to because the student was in the principal's office like every day, you
Wow.
know, and the talks weren't going anywhere. But the administrator bought in or reluctantly agreed to try to find a hook with this kid, you know, something positive to talk about,
Okay.
and it was going to be a reach because in brainstorming we really couldn't figure out anything, but we discovered that the child was trying to learn to do something, play an instrument, and the administrator invited him to bring the instrument in and play for him in the office, and that very that he did it, and interesting enough, the kid did bring the instrument in, played it, and then they made a date that he would play for this administrator um, twice a week.
Wow.
Would come in, and the and again, the administrator, this was a tough sell to this administrator, but in fairness, they took it on. We saw a dramatic change in this child. Within 3 months, the child was involved in helping produce the weekly auditorium set and everything, and suddenly became a kid that the other kids knew had this skill, and again was then able to use a positive attribute to get what he really wanted, which was that sense of belonging and so on. It was like truly a beautiful story. And,
That's a
and
wonderful sort of way to understand how some people can be helped in that kind of context. You see, there's a need behind that behavior, and
yeah,
what sounds like what you were part of this. It sounds like, but it sounds like that need was met, and you found an alternate approach to meeting that child's need, which is I think is beautiful.
oh
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and again, you know, like I think I just came up with it out of probably desperation at that
Yeah.
point, but
Yeah.
but um, but it sorry, I just lost you here. There you are. But you know, in fairness, it shows you the power that, and I think school staff often feel very powerless
Yeah.
in dealing with bullying and with both the victims, but particularly the bullies. I think for me that lesson taught me was just how much adults can make a difference if we kind of step back and stop seeing bullying as a discipline problem and see it as a sort of a social skill capacity building problem.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think that's wonderful because behind all the bullying is there's needs, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's a need to feel valued, a need to feel important, a need to be respected. There may be some issues, and so that would that be part of the treatment right now? What kind of treatments? One thing I'm not totally familiar are the initiatives in the schools right now, but I know they've taken some initiatives. What is happening right now? And even what can parents do to start making a change in either protecting a bully child or changing the behavior of a bully child to one who is bullied and trying to protect them, and what are we doing right
Sure.
now for
Well, various schools and school districts have programs around bully proofing, and there's one of the ones I've used the most was bully proofing your school, which is I think still available on Amazon. You can get it. Not I'm getting no kickback, by the way.
right?
I just noticed it's on
Yes,
it's
yeah.
on Amazon.
So that is that a book that
It's
you have
actually a
to
manual for schools, and
okay,
BC Ministry of Education had a similar program as well, and I wasn't able to confirm whether it's still available, but I'm pretty sure it is.
okay.
Um,
Good for people
so
to know.
so from a school perspective, schools and school-wide programs have been found to be the most effective. In those, really, what you're looking at is uh, uh, educating everybody in the building about what is bullying, what is not bullying, which is very important,
Right,
and what you can do about it if you're a victim or if you're a bystander, and this really to be for a school-wide program to be effective. The research shows you have to have support of administration. They whether that's, I would say, at the school level, but also at the district level and the community level. You need about 80% or so of staff to say, yes, this is a problem that we want to deal with. And then you need data. You need to understand within the building, where is bullying occurring, when is it, and then make plans that change maybe structure. I've often I think having just the way the playground is laid out, uh, where are staff members or adults in the playground. It's quite predictable, really, in my experience anyway. The adults are close to the building. The bullying is all happening out in the far corners. If you really want to
right.
see it, usually that cluster of trees over there.
Yeah.
So you want to address, that. So that's just a structural component. Washrooms. I often, if I was to have another life, I think it would be consulting how to design the layout of schools, because
Right.
often we'll have the office in a central location, the bathrooms way off to the far ends. Now, bathrooms is one of the places where bullying happens.
Right.
You kind of want the bathrooms right across from the office, and
So
and
there's
have
certain things
adults
that they can put in place on the environmental level to
on the
prevent
environment,
it,
and then
you know?
procedural levels,
Right,
and then teaching, and it is teaching staff and kids what is bullying and
right,
to identify it, and for there to be regular talk of bullying and what to do about it, what
right.
to do as a bystander, and that we don't tolerate it.
And as you mentioned, right now, moving away a little bit from the disciplinary, because I think besides the fact that you may have, the minor group of sociopathic bullies that are maybe harder to help, that it may be also a red flag for many of those kids who do become bullies for intervention.
Yes.
Because, one of the things I've always questioned is, on the one hand, we have relegated a huge responsibility of care to children to the parents, and we've
Mhm.
put upon the parents that expectation that they're going to be able to take care of their children, teach them appropriate behaviors, and but what happens is when that isn't happening and when the parents are not playing that role of helping their children either, of course, it's coping with bullying, but also helping their children, um, inoculating them against bullying and teaching them not to become bullies, that may not be happening in the home front. And how do we do that? How much responsibility does a school take on? And when you mentioned that they try and teach, one thing that I remember seeing is they'd have role plays of, let's say, the showing what bullying looks like so that
Mhm.
children know, and maybe teaching them some assertiveness skills and
Mhm.
being able to protect themselves from bullying. When a parent is feeling helpless, however, because it doesn't stop bullying, right? And I
Yeah.
think, we haven't figured out a way to completely stop bullying. Um,
No. Yeah.
no. And what should a parent do if they know that their child is being bullied? They've maybe even brought it to school attention. I've certainly seen situations
Yeah.
where they have brought it to school attention.
Mhm.
Not enough to make a difference. Sometimes children are scared it's going to make it worse.
Yeah.
Um, and if a parent is going, I don't know what to do anymore. My child is scared, besides moving, because I do know sometimes that's
Yeah.
what they do. They will pick up and go to another school.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Sure. Well, I always like to encourage parents to keep talking to the staff till the school staff until you find someone who will listen. But you're quite right. I mean, sometimes you get nowhere,
Yeah.
and certainly I've witnessed that to great frustration myself.
Is it the school that doesn't taking it seriously, or is it because there's, what are some of the things that play into the problem around it?
I think that component is really again a feeling of helplessness on the part of the staff and administration, and bullying is not. I mean, it's in a way very simple to address it in a school, and there are lots of programs to do it. But you really need to, as with any sort of behavioral support program in a school, which is really the best way of addressing these kind of behaviors, the most effective way. But it requires a commitment on the staff, and administration. Like I said,
Are already
80%
probably
of the staff.
exhausted and have a lot of things going on in their plate. And I mean,
Oh, definitely, yeah.
know,
And so say, regardless of whether or not you're getting support from school staff, and it certainly is best if you do, and you want this, you want the support to be informed and driven by good practice, but there's lots of material out there. But even if you're not, at one of the core features for the victim is that sense of isolation, and so we have the victims, as well as the witnesses, need to understand that there are people who are in a position of influence who they can go to. So if nothing else, if your kid is telling you about it, make it as safe as you can for them to tell you about it.
absolutely.
So what I would say is there are very specific skills we can teach victims. You know, we tend to teach them, well, be assertive, talk, confront the bully, they'll back down. Mm, some kids can pull that off. I think that's pretty hard. I go back to when I was in grade 9. I was in a very toxic school, quite, and as a student. So gives you a good idea how long this, being a victim can last, because I still remember it, and And really, to be quite honest, I think bullying was being displayed by the adults in the building as well. And it's very difficult when you are a victim to stand up to a bully.
Oh, huge, huge.
And so, other skills is think about where the bullies are and avoid that area. You know,
I think this is a good,
hang out
absolutely,
where close where the adults are. Like it
absolutely.
is less likely to happen. Now, so learn to get help. Like,
Yes.
what is the teacher you trust the most? Go to that teacher, or where are the adults? Where are the sanctuaries you can go to get help? This is not about you. This is about the bully. You just happen to be the person that they've targeted.
And that might take repeated explanation to them, because I think
You
to
have to
help
do it.
someone really grab that, so
Yeah,
it take that as an opportunity for the children to learn their sense of worth and
yeah,
to build
yeah,
that in
yeah.
the context of this adversity. Yeah.
Yeah, with victims, I also in the past, I teach them what bullying is and the dynamics behind it,
Yeah.
and the science behind it.
Yes.
I teach them a bit of behavioral theory, which is think about what the bully wants you to do and don't do it. you know so
Absolutely.
typically the bully wants to, for direct bullying anyway, wants to see a response.
Yeah.
Don't give them that response. Either just walk away, which is sometimes hard to do as well, or use humor, which takes a lot of practice. And to be quite honest, I've spent many hours with kids teaching them how to fake um, not taking the name calling seriously,
Yeah.
and one of my favorite ones, and I've taught adults this as well,
I know
interestingly,
we all have to learn it, don't we?
right? But it's sort of
Yeah.
like you get called a name, and one of my tricks is just go, oh, I've been called that name quite a bit. I'm just not feeling it, and
Yeah.
then get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, oh, I've never been called that name. I'm not even sure what that means, and turn around and and then disengage. Again, the point is we're actually trying not to reinforce the bully's behavior, and give the kids some
Absolutely.
sense of control of it.
Absolutely.
But these are all things that take teaching, guided practice, and practice, practice,
So
practice.
they
So
need some support, and really a big support system. I know that that is a piece of it, and I think um, I know my partner. He'd gone through some of his own bullying, but one of the things that he found was helpful was when he went into cadets. And so one of my thoughts about bullying is, all of us human beings, we need a sense of belonging, and we need a
yeah,
sense of having, people that accept us.
yeah,
And if children are experiencing that in a school system and they're struggling with that, and these are formative years, you want to develop a sense of self that is
yeah,
affirming, that it could be helpful even to have children join some kind of skill or group outside of their school system, whether it's a
yes,
sport or playing a musical instrument or doing something and finding another niche where they're outside of that. Because I do know once we step out of high school and we know about the suicide that's happened to children, and I think what's hard is um, for many of them that bullying ends when school ends. And as much as we want to minimize it, prevent it, and stop it, they don't have the foresight to be able to see into the future and know that this is their sense of worth. I've heard so many people say, I started to feel better about myself from the day that high school ended,
yes,
and
yes,
that was a turning point for them in their lives. And I think it's so important for children to have something that steps them out of that environment, that mental state that they're in.
yeah,
And so that, I think one of the things that happened when my partner did the cadets is not only did he get a sense of belonging, but he learned discipline. He learned sort of a sense of self-worth through actions and physical stamina.
yeah,
So sometimes that confidence you build internally, it can impact a child and how they present in the school place and make them less less inclined to be the targets of bullying. And, I know it's not a black and white issue. It doesn't, but I think what you're trying to do is put the cards, that deck there in favor of someone being able to get through that and do it successfully, right?
Oh yeah, and I agree. Like and this transcends sort of the issue of bullying, and just goes to how to raise children,
How to raise children, huge.
I,
Absolutely.
I think what gets us through our lives is our capacity, not our incapacity. And
Absolutely.
what we're good at, not what we're bad at. And I often, in working in schools, we'll have a child struggling with struggling with math and English and everything else, but they're really good at art. So we're going to pull them out of art and give them more math and more English tutorial. And I've always thought
Right.
that. That's kind of a
Counterintuitive.
crazy thing to do,
Yeah, absolutely.
because we're going to take away what you're good at and we're going to
Yeah,
make you do more of what you hate. you
yeah,
know but it is that capacity, and that is actually one of the research components. They say one of the most effective things to do for victims is to make sure that they have something to
yeah.
go to where they are good at it and they
Yes.
enjoy it. And this is for any child. I mean, for adults too, we need to
Yes.
do what's enjoyable.
Absolutely. The principles are very much there. And then
Yeah,
you can also through that establish a place of belonging,
yeah,
because ultimately, that's my reference point. If I know that there's a group that already embraces me, I'm going to have that much more of a resourcefulness to protect myself from
yeah,
someone who has not been. And so this is probably going to be an ongoing issue in our culture. I think that we need to deal with, that we try to keep at what we're doing and maybe enhance it.
yeah.
And I thought this would be sort of, when as we're wrapping up and looking at closing this conversation. I do find it of interest just what's happening now in the political
Mhm,
sphere, and where we're certainly seeing bullying. I'm perceiving bullying in politics.
mhm,
I'm
yeah,
seeing bullying. Of course, we're seeing it right now happening, because racism for me is a form of bullying, when we exclude and of all the Asian Americans right now that are being attacked. In your mind, are they bullies? These people were, is it
so
racist to bully? I mean, are we
yeah.
looking at a culture of bullying here that's happening right now?
Well, certainly, and racism is a very good component, or thing to look at. And I'll go back to the idea. It needs to be intentional. It needs to be repeated, and there needs to be a power imbalance. So, cultural biases exist, I think, across all cultures. We tend to be most comfortable with people who think and act and dress and everything
Yeah.
else like ourselves. So you know, so there is sort of a biasness for us to feel more comfortable around people who are like us, and less comfortable around people who are different. So now, what people will often say, so what is racism? Now, racism is when you and I'm certainly not an expert on the definition of racism, but in my mind anyway, it is when you use power that your group has against another group, and that's that's where we have disadvantaged populations and so on. But going to the idea, racism, even the way a lot of adults are behaving, and adults in position of power, they're when they exhibit bullying behavior, what does that do to us? Well, it again reinforces in all our mind that the way to get power and influence is to find the weakness of other people, to isolate them, to make them different in one way or another, so that others feel less empathy for them, and isolate them and push them away.
And I mean, it's for me, I still, when I see these behaviors, I always think of children, because I don't see them as my ideal of how adults would behave, and that we'd have more compassion and understanding of one another. But I do see that, and so certain behaviors we think of insulting and putting down, but the other pieces of bullying for me is that if you don't think the way that I do, then you will be punished. And if you are not, like you said, you're not looking, you're not um, acting on my behalf, you will be punished. And
Hmm.
this can happen in organizations, in corporations, in larger companies. It can happen on the political sphere. I really think that if we were able to talk more about the impact of that, I know that we present these stories in the news, but we don't really elaborate on what does it look like? When does it cross that line? Because
Hmm.
when we are threatening, whether it's another politician to be in alignment with us, and if you're not, you will be ostracized, you will be villainized, you will be basically potentially scrutinized and have your career impacted negatively. I think that we have a certain level of bullying in our culture, and I think that's why it's nice to understand what bullying is, and if we can recognize that for what it is. And I don't know that everyone sees it. I don't, that name is certainly not given to it. I know there's a repetitive component to it, but the repetition is happening more globally, right? It's happening at different levels. So it
It,
might not happen with the same group, but I certainly see some with the same group that their policies are framed in a way that is very, you're either in or out, and when you're out, it's not good, right?
Yeah,
So
we've certainly, and not being a political historian, I can't say whether it's worse or better, but I think particularly with media, we see it more readily, and particularly in recent times where media has been
yes.
used and modeled in very much a bullying way. And again, I'll always go back to because quite often, the argument is, well, no, it's not bullying. I was just joking and so on. But if you go back to the idea that, okay, was your behavior intentional? Have you done this more than once to this
Yeah.
person or this group of people? And is there a power imbalance? It's bullying. I'm sorry,
And the whole concept about a joke, and this is something I thought about for many years,
yeah,
because I think when people were joking and I was younger, I didn't have the resources to know, am I supposed to laugh? Like, it's a joke. It
yeah,
doesn't,
yeah,
certainly doesn't feel funny. But what I have certainly come to understand is, when that framework is used, it gives us a permission slip to say anything we want, as long as I follow it up with it being a joke. So I think there's something very underhanded in that kind of justification for what we do.
yeah,
Um,
and
you
and,
know,
and
yeah,
yeah, and in that, particularly when I first started doing this with kids, is around the idea of joking, because you're quite right. That is the joke is or I'm only joking. I mean, that is the classic, beautiful, hard one to
oh,
to
dude,
to to address, and and this is something I think in society we've got to get our head around. If we're going to joke with somebody, we take responsibility for how they perceive it.
absolutely,
Which when you think about it is pretty hard to do. I'll say a joke to somebody.
yeah,
I better know how they're going to. I need to know them well enough to know how they're going to take it.
yeah,
So maybe my lifelong friend, I can go pretty cutting on the joke. I'll still screw up though,
yeah,
undoubtedly.
yeah, absolutely,
So so and this is with kids in particular, but even with adults in institutions I've worked with, I pointed out that you may have said it as a joke, but it wasn't taken as one, and that's not the person's fault. It's
yeah,
your fault.
yeah, yeah.
You misread how they were going to take it. And to be quite honest, you keep telling the same joke over and over to that person around the same group of people. I don't think it's a joke. I
Well,
think it's
this
bullying.
this
you
is the
know,
piece, right? This is why, if it the repetition piece of this definition is so important,
uh,
because
yeah,
we may all, and I certainly have, I tried to be sensitive to people, but we may all do it, and but if we don't learn from some of our experiences, and become sensitized to what we might be saying,
yeah,
then you can certainly start to question whether there's an intent behind that. I think this is why I think bullying and the conversations about it and understanding it, and maybe down the road having even a conversation about really what does it look and feel like, and how do we protect ourselves from it, would be a
Hmm.
great conversation to have, like, with specific instances, because people don't know what to do. Like, what do I do when someone comes up to me and says, hey, you're not going to be part of this group because, how do I handle that? How do I, if I get angry, then I'm going to be further alienated because I'm this crazy angry person. If I do nothing, then it's going to be like I'm enabling it, and I don't care, and you can treat me badly. Like, I really think figuring out the way that we can maintain our self-worth, I think would be worth a great conversation maybe down the road if you're
Yeah, and
interested,
and
right?
and there,
Yeah,
again, we can borrow from all these programs that are designed for children. The
absolutely.
adults can use them as well. I mean, the obvious first step usually is to ensure that the person who is saying something to you or doing something to you is aware that you don't like them doing it, that it has this impact, and it's, in a sense, it's owning it. It's,
Yeah,
saying, listen,
absolutely.
when you do this, but I don't like it. Now, that will work. Basically, you're giving the perpetrator benefit of the doubt there.
Sure.
And the minute it continues, then that tells you at least it's intentional, and that clarifies that you're dealing with bullying.
Well, I
And
should be
then,
looking at that book. I should be looking at that book, and then maybe we'll have another conversation down
yeah,
the road, because I actually think when parents are listening to this, or even an adult who's been bullied and gone through it, they're still going, yes, but how do I protect myself and how do I do it? And I think that could be a conversation about just really different variety, because I don't think it's a black and white thing. I think we got to kind of go through a lot of different problem solving and figuring out with that particular situation what would be the best case scenario and on how to handle it. I personally think it would be a really valuable
yeah,
conversation to have. I mean, we did a
totally.
really great unpacking, I think, of the concept of bullying and what's present with it. I think this was great conversation. And I'm also aware we are good talkers. So we covered our time. Is there anything, what would you like to leave people off with? What would be a recommendation, a thought for people who are encountering
Well,
bullying?
sure. That bullying is a problem, and it affects children and adults. It affects certainly our society, in the sense that we lose a lot of giftedness and a lot of capacity. There are things we can do about it. I think that helplessness, that either the victims or the adults around the victims feels, often stops us and causes us to throw up our hands. It's not easy, but the fixes are simple, in many ways. So uh, but I think we start, when it comes to kids, we start by watching our own behavior. Am I using power in a way to undermine the rights and the self esteem of others? So make sure we kind of catch ourselves in our mini bullying, I guess.
Right. Totally.
And that kids, for children, they need to have adults they can go talk to. So
Right.
it goes back to, another rule of parenting, on top of, find what the kid is good at and let them do it, or what they enjoy and let them do it. But the other one is, make sure that you know what's going on in your kid's life, and that they can talk to you about things. Make it safe,
That's wonderful.
not non-judgmental. Just, you know tell me about how your day was. How are things going?
Keep the space and open dialogue for that conversation. And,
Yeah.
I don't remember how Caesar, Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer, I don't know how I'm always thinking about what he's doing as he's rehabilitating. He's rehabilitating the dog and he's treating the adults. And I
Yeah.
think at a foundation, I think we need to stop bullying in adulthood. And
Yeah.
because if we can reach adults who have the power to change that, that we can become that model ultimately for all the children that exist. And so that is my wish out there for those of us who are experiencing it, is that we all learn the principles of being, non-bullying, respectful human beings. Um, Thank you so much, Arthur. I love talking to you. I know that we're going to have possibly other opportunities. I'm hoping to have conversations, and thanks for taking the time. I think this is really invaluable and very timely for people to be talking about this.
It's always awesome to be here. Now I can say that.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. So we'll
yeah.
meet again. I'd love to carry on. We should talk a little bit about that bullying idea, and I just wish you the best, and we'll talk soon. And you
Okay.
can stay on the line, and I'll catch up with you once I'm done.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. So just want to thank you listeners for tuning in to this show. This was the Dr. Lake show. I'm here with Dr. Arthur Burrows, and we did discuss bullying. So this is something that if you look into it and actually start having conversations about it, hopefully you will be able to address some of the issues you may be encountering with bullying. So I wish you all the best. Take good care. And until next time, all the best.